All right, so well, look, I want to thank both Louisa and Julie for having me on today. I'm excited to be here for the Sussex County community. I hope you are all safe and healthy, and we're going to cover a lot of information today. So feel free to take notes, and we're a pretty small group tonight, so you can always pop your questions into the chat room, and we can always check that periodically. And then also, you know, at the end, I'll leave more time for some Q&A, because it's a lot to digest. And all along throughout this entire presentation, you're probably going to be thinking, well, how does that really apply to me? So I'm Jody Bloom. I'm one of the co-founders of Cornerstone College Solutions. And the real reason our firm is we're part of a larger Cornerstone group. And we do everything, you know, really all comprehensive financial planning. But I specialize in college and working with families to help them figure out how are they going to pay as little as possible for school, because that's my goal ultimately. And then how do I do that so that retirement isn't jeopardized? Because we're going to talk about a lot of this, but school's really expensive. So what I would just say is take this all in. My number is 201-463-3024. And you can see on the screen. Everybody able to see the screen, by the way? Okay. If for any reason you can't, let me know. And my email is jody@cornerstonecollegesolutions.net. Everybody has the ability to give us a call, or even put in the chat room if you'd like to come in after we conclude tonight to do some free college planning for you. I always do that for all of the participants that attend our workshop. So certainly, you know, you can send a message in here and we'll reach out to you, or you can take my number and my email and reach out. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why I really wanted to specialize in college planning is really twofold. First, when I went to college, I came out of school. My mom was a single mom. I saw my mom go into a lot of debt, and I came out of school, undergrad, with a tremendous amount of debt. In fact, I didn't get to pay that off until well into the time when I was married, something my husband was really thrilled about. But so my goal is to help minimize the amount of loans that anybody has to take. The second reason that I do this is because I saw a lot of financial planners in the industry, and it was very easy for them to say that they were doing college planning, but really they weren't looking comprehensively at families' goals. Every family is very different. We all have unique financial goals. We have different children. They have different academic achievements and leadership achievements and talents. So everything is different. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all college plan. So you should just know that, you know, if in your travels you're working with somebody and they just say, okay, throw all your money into a 529, or throw all your money into this or that, without really going over what the long-term picture looks like for you and your family, you may want to just look further. Okay. For some reason, oh, there we go. Okay, it's a little delayed. Okay, so regardless of how much you have saved for college or not, some people on this call may have saved a tremendous amount and don't want to hand it all over. Some have saved very little and are going to really be in need of financial aid. And then there's the bulk of the people who have saved a little bit, and because of the rising cost of school, it probably isn't enough. But for all of you, I would just say the best parent tip I can give you is to just breathe. There are a tremendous amount of amazing schools in our country, and I am certain that we are going to help you, or you will find on your own some schools that are going to work really well for your children, and that can be within your budget or how you can make that work. You're going to get a lot of unsolicited advice. If you have juniors and seniors, especially, a lot of the conversation with the people you know, neighbors, people, you know, in your kids' friend group, your friends, your family, they're going to be talking and giving you advice. Oh, you have to apply here. So-and-so got a full ride. Well, so-and-so might have gotten a full ride, but that doesn't really mean that that's going to be what your child's going to achieve. So, just keep your blinders on, take the information in and channel it, and just make sure that you aren't taking advice from people that aren't qualified to give it. And when I say this, people really need to stay in their lanes. I'm going to give you a perfect example, and I will throughout the presentation give things to make it clear. We've been working with a family for a number of years, and they came in October of last year, and it was really the beginning of October, and they had hired a college admissions counselor. A lot of people do that, not saying at all that that is a bad thing to do. There's some very good ones, and some of them can be really great at what they do. But this family, their fourth child, okay, really wanted to ED to a particular school. And the advice that the admissions counselor had given was, don't put down that you're going to be applying for financial aid, because if you do, in all likelihood, your child may not get accepted. And that might put you into a different category because, and they said, absolutely don't put that down. Well, that couldn't have been worse advice, because the school that their child was looking to ED required everything to be in as of November 1st, not only the application, but the financial aid documents as well. And for financial aid, you have to be in it to win it. If you miss that deadline, they are not going to make exceptions. So, I was really glad to have caught them. That admissions counselor was amazing at helping their child complete the applications and work with them on the essays, but really didn't have an understanding of how the financial aid side worked. So just be careful of where you're getting information. We should all stay in our own lanes. You will never see me telling you what your children should be writing their college essay on, because that's not my area of expertise. If you get nothing out of this presentation tonight, I want it other than this, then I'll be happy. Never, ever say yes to your children about applying to certain schools until you know that you have a way to have that cost covered. I have seen it before. Ultimately, it can put people into very serious debt by allowing their children to apply and even attend schools that ultimately they can't afford. Or two, your children could be severely disappointed. And so it's really important to really work now. If you are married or have a significant other that is going to be helping to contribute, you're going to want to sit down and work through that and come up with a budget before your children start to apply. Sorry, there's like some kind of delay. There we go. Okay, so what is the overall cost of school today? So right now, the least expensive school option are the community schools. They're, you don't live on campus, it's $5,000 to $7,000. There's a lot of community schools. This is a great option for a couple of different people. Sometimes if you know you're not going to have enough for a four-year school, it is a good option to send kids to a community school for 2 years while you're able to save money for the following 2 years, ultimately giving them the option to finish, a full degree within that 4-year time span. It also makes a lot of sense if you have children that aren't really 100% sure that they really want college or that they want to go away, they're not sure what they want to do, better off figuring that out within the $5,000 to $7,000 price range. So that's a good option for families like that. The next up on the ladder are the in-state public schools for New Jersey residents, and they tend to range from about $15,000 all the way up to like Rutgers, which is about $35,000. The next level is the public schools that are in other states that your children might attend as an out-of-state resident. Now, the prices for the in-state residents are very different than the out-of-state residents, and they range from about $30,000 all the way up to about $65,000 now. University of Michigan is about 65, 66,000 right now. And some, UVA, some of the other schools for an out-of-state resident are that high. And then private schools tend to range from about 45,000 all the way up to about $80,000 now. So when you look at these figures, you can see it's an enormous amount. If you have one child, multiply those times 4. If you have multiple children, wow, that's a huge expense. For many people who have multiple children, the cost of school is likely the biggest expense or, of outlay of cash that you're going to ever make in your entire life, even maybe potentially more than a home. So, and don't forget about inflation. And many of the schools are outpacing inflation by about 3 times. So the costs are really skyrocketing. Now, a lot of people have asked me questions about, well, what are schools doing this upcoming year? And we see a lot of differences across the board. Some are saying, look, we understand that COVID has hit a lot of people really hard and we're going to hold our costs where they are at without increasing it. But some of the schools are hurting a lot because they lost a lot of income last year. Keep in mind that these schools are businesses. So some of them are increasing. I have 2 in college right now and 1 in high school. And, one of my children's school increased tuition 4.5%. So even in this crazy year, they're not even letting up on the cost. The other school has held the price exactly the same as last year, fortunately. Okay, so you guys have all seen this, I am sure. Looks like there's a lot of women on the call. Our Bed Bath & Beyond coupon. And the reason why I always throw this up here is because we are so accustomed to never ever walking into a Bed Bath & Beyond without our 20% off coupon, right? We've come to understand that anything inside that store, we don't have to pay the sticker price. We know we can get a discount. Well, I want you to liken that to attending a private school. Often people come in and say, look, our kids aren't going to be in school for a bunch of years, but we are not allowing them to apply to anything outside of a state school, no private schools. The cost is too much money. And that's a mistake. Now, look, if you really want your children to go to a public school, that is fantastic. There's amazing public schools. But those public schools tend to give less money, both on the merit side and the financial need-based side. The private schools, because they are expensive, do understand that for some people, they have to provide a discount in order to make it attractive for you to come. So, if you were thinking we can only apply to public schools, think again. You would be well served by throwing some private schools into the mix. Now, the cost of school has skyrocketed over time. In the past 40 years, it's almost close to a 300% increase and rising so rapidly. I remember, and I think a lot of you probably will recall this as well. I remember years ago them saying, when your kids go to school, it could be as high as $100,000 a year. And I thought to myself, that's crazy. That will never happen, but you could see it happening very quickly. And so it's important for families to plan accordingly. Now, the first thing that is really important is figuring out what is the overall cost of attendance. It can be very misleading. People, the first place you are often going to go to, the kids or the parents, are going to look at the websites for these schools. Now, some schools are amazing at being very transparent and putting all of the costs right out there for you to see. Fees and tuition and room and board. But a lot of schools don't do that, and they don't do it intentionally. It makes it really hard to figure out what's the real overall cost. And so you have to be able to do that. Now, you certainly can. If they don't include all of the costs, then you have to go to different parts of their website. You might have to go to the admissions department to look at the cost of tuition, but you might have to go to the housing to look at, the room and board. What I love actually is, just letting somebody in, or Okay, what I really like is the College Board website, collegeboard.org, collegeboard.com. If you could just mute your line, that would be great. Whoever's just coming on, welcome. Thanks so much. So when you're looking at the overall cost of attendance, there's things that I want to make sure you're looking at. All right, first and foremost, the largest cost is always going to be tuition. Then there's room and board, so the cost of the dorms or the apartments on campus, plus the meal plans. And then there's all these other incremental fees that you might have not expected, but they can add up and can sometimes be a couple $1,000s. The schools will also, as will College Board, make an estimate about the amount of, cost of books and travel expenses. I always say to parents, you have to think about the cost of clubs or, Greek life. If your children are considering going into Greek life, that can be another few $1,000s. And, multiply that times 4 years, it's going to add up. So if you go to College Board, you're going to see, you can go to College Board, and at the bottom you can put in, and it'll say like what college or university, and you just key in whichever school you're looking at, and you go over to the left hand side and you're going to see a tab called paying. I love this because it breaks it down between in-state and out-of-state costs. The example that I'm showing you happens to be a private school, and the in-state and the out-of-state in this example were exactly the same, but you'll see that it's tuition and fees and all the other expenses for a total of $65,000, $65,620. So when I've compared College Board to the actual schools, it could just be a couple $100 or $1,000, but it's going to be able to let you compare the cost of schools apples to apples. So you have an idea, when you're creating a list with your children, what those costs are going to be. Okay, so we talk about these expenses, right? And then we talk about 4 years for an undergraduate degree. But the truth is, and you guys should know this, that on average, it takes children in the US 5.5 years to graduate with an undergraduate degree. Okay, so that's unbelievable. So we looked at those expenses. I don't care which school you were looking at. If you add on another semester or another year or even another year and a half for your children to graduate, that's going to be a hefty bill. So yeah, $25,000 to $60,000 is going to really impact your budget. Now, when you look at the websites, you're going to want to know how quickly some of these schools are helping your children to get through. Years ago, all of the schools used to publish a 4-year graduation rate. And you would want to see it really high, in the 90%, 80%, but unfortunately, like you'll look now, you think you're looking at a 4-year graduation rate. Most of the schools put the figure of a 6-year graduation rate on there. So be very careful because you want your kids to be able to go to a school that is encouraging them to get through in a timely manner. All right, so only 41% are going to graduate within 4 years. Close to 57%, it's going to take 6 years. So I hope your kids are not in that, later figure and that they're in the 4-year figure. But if you help them to do the homework up front and you put them at the right school, you're going to see that they could potentially get there in 4 years. So why is it taking kids so long to get through school? Well, there are a number of reasons, a number of factors that are influencing that these days. First off, choosing the wrong school or major, it's really hard for young adults to figure out what they want to do in life. For most of us, we're still trying to figure it out, right? How many of you have had career changes or thought you were going to love doing something and you really found that you didn't love it? So when the kids are going there to these schools, sometimes they have an intended major and they pick a school that is amazing in that major, but when they decide that they don't really like that or they're not doing well in it and they want to make a change, that school might not even offer the next thing they want to do, or the prerequisites for the new major haven't even been covered. So that's one of the things. Then some veer off course because there's so many options offered. Some schools are, give a lot of leeway with their, people's choices of classes and how long it takes to actually declare a major, and that can be very overwhelming for some kids. If school is going to be expensive, and if you're going to have children that are going to be working during the school year to help pay either for their personal expenses or even toward tuition. And by the way, I'm totally not against that. My kids actually do work during school. It covers a lot of their spending money. But if they have to work a tremendous amount of hours to contribute, a lot of them can't keep up a full-time load. And not only will that make it longer to graduate, but you have to be really careful because both merit aid and financial need-based aid are, for most schools, the students are required to maintain full-time status during that time period. And the students are required to maintain a minimum GPA. For a lot of schools, it's 3.0, some it's 3.2. So if your kids are working outside of school and they're having a hard time focusing, that can really create some issues. So please, I've seen it happen where kids lose their scholarships because they're not doing well or they're not keeping a full-time course load. Social isolation, we're going to talk a little bit about this in a couple minutes, but the truth is that I know this is a college financial planning workshop, but it's important to find the right social fit for your children because it's ultimately going to cost you much more if they're not happy at the school that they're at. So, and you really have to consider that because there's so many things that go into whether a student's going to be successful at school. That is one of them. So if you have a child who's really introverted and is going to be completely overwhelmed by a big state school, that might not be the right environment versus, somebody that really needs a lot of stimulation and has to be, have a lot of friends and a lot of things going on, or in a big city. You're going to want to know early on. Now, transfer rates have skyrocketed. The Washington Post and the National Student Clearinghouse both did studies that showed that a third of all students transfer, and 50% of those that transfer do it more than once. Now, I never thought my own child would be in that boat, but my son did transfer. He actually was one of those kids that really intended to go into something. He was at a school that was very strong in engineering, and along the way he decided he wanted to be a creative writer. Well, that really wasn't the right school for him. So very quickly we made the move. He's very happy where he's at now. He actually moved to Emory, and it's a great location for him. But had we really known early enough and made some of those right choices, he wouldn't have had to transfer. Okay, so what's the solution? How do you keep the price down overall, right? And that's by doing the due diligence now. If you have, I'm assuming that most of you, and you can certainly put it in the chat, how old your kids, what year your children are in, but I'm assuming that if you're on here right now, they're probably juniors or rising seniors. Hold on one second. Somebody is trying to get in under my name. Not sure why. Okay. If that's the case, we're in a very unique year, right? So I have a rising senior, and unfortunately, we haven't been able to spend a lot of time looking at schools. We had a lot of college visits planned in the back half of this year, school year, and we weren't able to do it. But if you have younger children, it's a really good idea, even as early as like 9th and 10th grade. Look, I'm not suggesting that in 9th and 10th grade, you have to go and sit in on the information sessions and do the structured tour. However, if you're driving by and you're in a city that has a school, drive by, park the car, get out of the car, go into the student center, start getting a feel for whether they like an urban school or a more rural setting. Do they like large schools? They like small schools. Do they like, what's important? A lot of the energy on campus. Look, I'm not saying they're going to know exactly what school that they're going to want to go to, but they're going to start getting a feel for what feels right to them. Now, once you're hitting junior and senior year, I highly recommend that you do set up these tours, information sessions and tours early. Right now, the schools are doing them online, virtual tours and virtual info sessions. They're helpful. But when we're able to resume, it makes a lot of sense. You don't have to go see every school, but go see a few. And here's one of the things that I really highly recommend. And this is, not only a professional recommendation, but just as a parent, I found it really helpful when my kids were able to spend time on campus without me and without that, that admissions rep taking them around on the tour. If you have, if your student, your student has a friend that attends school, or somebody whose children, or child attends a certain school, maybe set up some time for them to spend there, even an overnight stay, so they can get a real good sense of like what the social life is like there, and they can sit in on classes. I also highly recommend that when you are visiting, try to call ahead and see if you can get into a particular class. Not only does it help to see like how do the students interact with the professors, but it also gives you something really amazing to write about, either in your, your essays for that particular school or in a thank you note to the rep, okay? And forget the rankings. I am sure a lot of people are talking about different schools and how they're ranked. People are living and dying by the U.S. News and World Report and some of the others that are ranking the schools. Look, you may want to have a general sense of where the schools are in terms of their rankings, but understand this. These schools are businesses, and I'm going to give you a perfect example. They do a lot of things on the marketing ends to make their rankings increase over time. Here's a perfect example. Tulane. I happen to love Tulane as a school. I've seen it. I've visited a couple times. It's great. I'm not criticizing Tulane, but one of the very interesting things that they did a number of years ago was to make their application free. For those of you that don't know, applications tend to be about $65 to $75 a pop. If you have a lot of financial issues, you can apply to have that waived. But for most people, you're going to pay $65 to $75. They decided to make their application free. Okay, how fantastic. So now every parent and every student was like, all right, I wasn't sure if I really wanted Tulane, but you know what the heck? I'll just throw an application there. They're on the Common App. No problem. I'm just going to throw it out there. Well, all of a sudden, Tulane got an influx of so many more applications than they typically saw, but they were maintaining the amount of students that they were admitting. So all of a sudden, their selectivity ranking went up, and then they saw their rankings go up. So I'm not saying that they don't deserve to have a good ranking. I'm just saying there are things that these schools do that just are a business decision to make sure that their rankings are going up. So don't, find the right school, make your own rankings based on the right fit for your children. Okay, so what are the right pieces to the puzzle? So right academic fit. 100% you need to be in the right academic fit. If your children are making a list of schools and most of the schools on that list are what they call reach schools, really difficult schools for them to probably get into, then you're going to want to make sure that you have some, target schools and safety schools on there as well. Because a lot of kids will often go for a right academic fit, or think they're getting the right academic fit, but they're really going to be struggling at a school that is more of a reach for them. So just be careful for that, and make sure that, if you can, they have a number of different interests that ahead of time if the school offers all of those, okay? And know ahead of time a couple of things. One thing, let's say they want to go in as an undecided major and they're going to go into sort of the liberal arts college within that university. And that university has a business school that they might want to consider down the road, you want to make sure that you didn't have to apply into the business school beforehand. It's things like that that are going to make things easier for finding the right academic fit. Okay, right social fit, we talked about that. It's very important because, again, if your kids have to transfer, they're not happy and they're not doing well, trust me, it's going to hurt your pocketbook. And then for some reason, the right financial fit is always left to be the last decision. Very often people come into our office and their kids are juniors and seniors, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't come and talk to professionals that can help you look at your financial situation, but you want to make sure that you're thinking about your whether that school is a financial fit now, and making sure that you sit down and do a budget. And look, it's okay if you don't have all the money for school, but most people don't. But if you don't, how are you going to continue to save? Or if you have to borrow, where is the best place for you to borrow from? You're going to want to think about some of those things ahead of time and not have to make some rash decisions that could hurt you later. Okay. So let's talk about overall resources. There's a lot of resources for paying for school, right? So there's the total cost of school, but where's the money going to come from? Well, first and foremost, we've been talking about this, the monthly payment plan, the cash flow. What do you have at the end of every month? You have your revenue that comes in through your income. You have your household expenses. What's left over at the end of the month to do one of two things, either to save for school or to pay for school? The second is 529 college savings plans. Some of you may have had these. These are college savings plans that were established a number of years ago. The government basically created them. They were originally thought to be like the be-all, end-all because they were giving a tax benefit if you saved within this plan and you used all of those savings as well as the money that grew inside the plan for educational expenses. Now, 529 plans can, some people have done very well in them. For some families, they make a lot of sense. For others, you have to be careful not to put too much money into them, because understand that if you don't use it all for college or educational expenses, then you're going to have to do that at a penalty. They also come with some market risk because they are real investments in the marketplace. So it doesn't always make sense. Now, there are a lot of different things you can do with your 529 plan. Some people are saving within the plan under each of their different children's names, but understand that it's really a savings account that is under your name, and you have the ability to utilize those funds for different children at different time periods. So we always sit down and figure out when is it best to use what you have in the 529 if you've already saved there. Student and parent savings. Obviously, part of the cost of school is going to be the student and parent savings, okay? Again, I don't know how much you have. I'm not sure, there could even be grandparent savings, but that's one of the other resources. Student loans, we're going to talk in a moment about student loans. And then pairs. A lot of times the student loans, and we're going to talk about it, are limited in the amount that the students can actually borrow on their own. So parents have an opportunity to borrow through a number of different ways, either through private bank loans, through the government loans. We're going to talk about those. From their retirement savings. It always pains me to see people having to dip into their retirement savings because that comes at a penalty. Not only does it come at a penalty if you're, under the age of 59 and a half, but you haven't paid taxes on that. So in order to take, if you have $100,000 sitting in an account, you're limited for how much you can take out. You also are going to have to take that out and first pay taxes. So, just keep that in mind. And then parent and student investments. There are many different types of investments in the marketplace, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, government bonds. There's a lot of different investments. And then financial aid. And we're going to talk a lot in this back half of the presentation about financial aid. Now, financial aid for our purposes refers to two things. It doesn't just mean need-based, but that is a huge component of financial aid. Is your family eligible for financial aid? Okay, now based on need. Then there's also this huge opportunity for merit aid. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that as well, but here's the one thing I want you to know, that many people leave tens of thousands of dollars on the table by not applying for financial aid. And it's a huge mistake. A lot of times I hear clients saying, look, we can't qualify, we're not going to apply for financial aid, and that's a big mistake. The second thing is, your children don't have to be at the top of their class in order to get merit aid. They just have to position themselves correctly to get merit aid. So we're going to talk about that. Okay, so loans. So I don't know if you guys know, but there is obviously a huge amount of college debt outstanding in our country. Okay, $1.5 trillion of college debt. And the reason I'm calling it college debt is because a lot of times people say student debt, but a lot of that is actually parent debt. And I'm going to explain why. So up here, you're going to see there are a couple of loans called federal direct subsidized and federal direct unsubsidized loans. Those are the true student loans. Now, students can take up to $5,500 in student loans as freshmen, $6,500 as sophomores, and in junior and senior year, they're eligible to take up to $7,500. Now, the only way to get student loans is to apply for financial aid. And even if you don't qualify for grants and scholarships, you'll always be able to get some of these student loans potentially. Now, you have to apply, okay? So please don't miss those dates. October 1st is the first time that the financial aid forms become available. And we're going to talk about that in a moment, but you want to make note of that. October 1st of your child's senior year is when you want to start looking at financial aid documents. Okay, so how do these student loans work? Well, as I mentioned, they are only eligible for, let's say, freshman year up to $5,500. The subsidized loans within that $5,500, they could be eligible, for up to $3,500 from the government. And the only difference between a subsidized and an unsubsidized loan is when the interest starts to accrue. So the interest rate is the same, but with a subsidized loan, the government doesn't start to accrue the interest until the graduation time. After graduation, 6 months after graduation. The unsubsidized, that interest starts to accrue from the moment the money is distributed to the schools. So usually that's each semester. Okay, now, right now, these rates right now are the lowest in history. I think only one other time was there a lower interest rate for student loans. So the government has said, okay, we're in this COVID situation, a lot of economic issues right now, we're going to lower the rates. So this year, the 2020 to 2021, that gets locked in for 2.75%. And then usually around July 1st is when the rates for the next year are going to become available. Okay, so what if $5,500 isn't enough? What then? Well, fortunately, the government, for most people, unless you've had major credit issues like a bankruptcy, most people are eligible, most parents are eligible to borrow up to the full amount of school. Therein lies the problem with our college debt in this country. And most people are sending their kids to schools that cost a lot of money, but they're borrowing at that. Now, you can count on your kids to pay that off, but you might be sorely disappointed later. Please know that if you take the Federal Plus Loan, and that stands for Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students Studies, okay? So you have to understand that you are the one signing on the dotted line, and ultimately that debt is likely to not go away. So when you're taking that on, know that there's a good chance it might be all yours. Now, there are state programs. There are some state loans depending on income levels. And you can also go privately to get loans as well. Now, sometimes you're going to see published rates that are lower than the government rate, but you have to have the most amazing credit to do that. And they're a little less flexible in terms of the repayment schedules. So just know that you can certainly explore both and ultimately decide what you want to do. Also just came across this really interesting company that pulls together a lot of loans, and they approach banks with massive amounts of loans because they want to be lending to people. So sometimes you can get some good rates there as well. Okay, so can you afford this? You have to decide. You decide the budget. One of my partners years ago, I mean, obviously we're in the business, but he and his wife sat down, they figured out how much they had. They have 2 children, and they determined that they were able to afford $30,000 a year for each of their children. And they sat down and they talked to their kids and they said, look, we want you to be aware of this situation. We want to help you with college, but we can only do $30,000 a year. Above and beyond that, it's going to be your student loan, your, federal student loans. And if you're going to go to a school that's going to cost a lot more than we're able to give, then you're going to have to make sure that that school is going to be a kind of school that's going to give you merit aid. So you better work hard in order to achieve that. And ultimately, the kids knew, and they knew what to expect, and they worked within that. And I want you to know that sitting down with your children, a lot of people don't talk to their children about finances. I can't tell you whether you should or not, but I do highly recommend it with this college situation. I do think it's important to sit down and have the discussion about where the money is going to come from and how much you think you're going to be able to contribute. And because you're going to then make a comprehensive list of schools that work either within your budget or within the realm of being able to achieve merit aid. And again, no guilt. Your kids are going to go to good schools, I assure you. My favorite slide next to the Bed Bath one is this. This is burying your head in the sand. This, unfortunately, is what many people think is a proper college funding plan, but it's not. I don't care. Look, it's not always a pretty situation, okay? I've been there. And I know personally, it takes a lot to figure out how you're going to get through this and how you're going to get through it without figuring that, down the road when you need to retire, there'll be no money left. So, but burying your head in the sand is not a good solution. Whether you decide to come in and talk to, me or one of my partners, or you're going to go somewhere else, that's fine. I just want you to, from today, it's really great that you're on this call. It means that you're taking an interest in this and you're trying to start planning. Please, I beg you to not get off of this Zoom and then go back to saying, well, I don't know what to do. I'm going to just do nothing. Please, there are things that you can do. And it's really important to, because if you take action now, it can definitely impact what's going to be available to you later. Okay, so ways to fund college. There's the need-based financial aid, and we're going to talk about that now. Merit-based, we're going to talk about that after we go through financial aid. There are private scholarships and proper college funding plans. Now, you should explore all of these. You should have a proper college funding plan, but you should definitely be thinking about ways, will you be eligible for financial aid? And is there something that you can do now to make sure that you enhance your abilities to get financial aid? And there are many things that you can do. Also, making sure that as your children are approaching that junior and senior year, that you're exploring these merit. Now, we're going to jump into private scholarships before we talk about anything. Here's the thing. Private scholarships, I hear it all the time. I'm going to have my kids apply to get private scholarships. I'm going to have them doing this application. Look, If you had all the time in the world, great. But on average, these private scholarships are like 500, 750, 1,000 even. Some of them are only $250. Very few are getting those full scholarships. But this is, I'm going to read this to you. And this is really from a anonymous college admissions officer. And they said, look, my problem isn't with private scholarships, but with the suggestion that if the students only applied to enough of them, they'd be able to pay for college or avoid large amounts of debt. Of course, there's going to be some students who are going to receive enough scholarships to pay for college. And if you have time to apply for the scholarships, you should. But the truth about scholarships is that most students would be better off if they used their time figuring out which schools are most likely to give them the most money before they even apply for admissions or for scholarships. So look, a lot of times you can go online. There's some great websites, you know, when you come in, I can give you a list of online. You never have to pay to figure out if, you know, where there are private scholarships. There's a lot of free online scholarship sites. You put in all the information about your children and their interests and your background, and they will literally send you scholarship opportunities every day. But it's difficult to get, and again, there's not a lot of money. And the other thing I would tell you is that if you get a financial aid package, a lot of the schools require you to report the private scholarships that you get, or they're going to have to show it as income on tax returns the following year, and they're going to reduce the financial aid package by that amount. So look, it still makes sense to look at them. You know, certainly one of the best things that you can do is sit around with your extended family and say, okay, you know, what religious organizations do we belong to? What civic organizations? Which of our employers might give scholarships? You can also reach out to your guidance counselors to get a list of some of the local scholarships. Some of the high schools at the end of the year, the award ceremony will give out some small private scholarships from the community. But again, there's a whole lot more money to be had through the financial aid system and through the private scholarship world. Okay, hold on one second. I'm just going to take a sip. Right before I got on, Luis and Julie know this, I really spilled a lot of water on myself. Okay, cost of attendance. So we talked about figuring out what the full cost of attendance is and the importance of that. It's going to include tuition, room and board, books, some of those miscellaneous fees. I mean, when I see my kids' school statements coming, the invoices, there's the, the gym fees, the health center fees, there's a lot of other things you're going to want to make sure you have in there. But once you know that, there is a formula which is the cost of attendance minus EFC. You're going to hear a lot about this word EFC, and it stands for expected family contribution. And it's really based on a very specific formula, and having an understanding of how that formula works is going to help you in advance to know how much that school is expecting your family to contribute that year. Now, cost of attendance minus your expected family contribution is going to be what your demonstrated financial need is. Before I even go on and talk more about the formula, I want to talk about a couple of things. There are two forms of there are two types of financial aid forms that schools may require. Every school requires something called the FAFSA, F-A-F-S-A, and we're going to talk about what goes into the formula for the FAFSA's expected family contribution. So every school, whether it's a private school, a public school, they're all going to require the FAFSA. It's not that difficult. I mean, there are people that can help you to fill out those forms if you do have a complicated financial situation. I have a few people that I know who are really good at what they do with those forms. So if you need help, great, you're going to let me know. But for the most part, the FAFSA is not that difficult. You're going to be able to go online starting October 1st, and When you go online, it's very easy to download your tax return, which is going to populate a lot of the form. And then you're going to put in all of your assets, the parent assets and student assets. So we're going to go through that, but you should just know that that's the FAFSA. Then there's something called the CSS profile form, and that's provided by the College Board, that same site that I really like to look at how much the schools are going to cost. That form is not required by every school, but it is required by about 350 to 400 schools now, and rising. Those are a lot of the private schools and some of the larger state schools. So that form itself, we're not going to talk specifically about that one tonight. I'll tell you a little bit of the differences between that and FAFSA, but in general, that form requires a lot more information, and they take into consideration a lot more assets. But I also don't want you to get scared off by that, because the schools that tend to request the profile form are schools that tend to have larger endowments and larger financial aid packages. So they might be asking for more information, but that's because they have a lot more money to give. So just want you to know that. Don't let the, a little bit more information having to be passed along to them scare you off, because again, they have a lot more money to give. Okay, so how do you figure out what your expected family contribution is? So this is a formula, and that calculation is based on parent assets and student assets, and parent income and student income. So the higher your income and assets, the higher your expected family contribution, which means the lower demonstrated need. So if ever there was a time that you wanted to appear poor or to have less money, now's the time when you're applying to schools. So now, the reason why it's so important to understand this formula now is because where you save is going to make a significant difference, and where you have your assets in this formula. So let's talk about that. Okay, so here's just a quick example. This is a $45,000 school a year, and minus your expected family contribution. In this example, this family has an expected family contribution of $25,000, so their demonstrated need is $20,000. 45 minus the 25, 20. Okay, so one of the things, because this formula is based on income and assets, the assets are a moment in time. So, if you are like, oh my God, I'm going to learn all about this, but maybe I have my assets in the wrong place, it's okay. When we work with our clients, we figure out where these assets need to be. You still have time, because when you fill out those forms, that's your assets at that moment. However, income is actually going to be 2 years prior to the fall that your children are attending school. So that's why you really want to understand, because there are things that you can do to influence income ahead of time. So if you knew that you were going to be getting a big bonus, and you had the option of asking your employer to put it the year before or to hold off to the next year, depending on what year of school your children were in, that could make a huge difference in your expected family contribution. So as an example, the students that are going to be freshmen right now in this incoming fall class, they're attending school fall of 2020. The tax returns that the financial aid forms were based on was 2018. So if you have a rising senior and they're going to start applying to schools in the fall, you're going to fill out financial aid forms starting in October, beginning then, and then that's going to be based on the 2019 tax return, because your children will be entering in 2021. Now, you have to reapply for financial aid every year. So some years you're going to get more financial aid than others. So even if you don't get a great financial aid package in one year, doesn't mean that the next year you won't, or vice versa. Okay, so just know that you have to reapply. Listen to this, because I don't want anybody to make this mistake. The financial aid deadlines are different for each school. you have to make sure, and I highly recommend like an Excel spreadsheet or handwritten spreadsheet that is going to list out the schools that your children are looking at, their admission deadlines, as well as their financial aid deadlines. Because again, if you miss this, you have no opportunity to apply, okay? Now, with the admissions deadlines, I do want to explain that there are, and many of you may know this, so I'm just going to tell you anyway, I'm sorry if you do, there are regular decision applications, which tends to be around the January, February timeframe. There's early action deadlines, which tend to be really like November 1st, November 15th, some of them are even in December. And then there are early decision applications. An early decision application is binding. So if your children are applying and they say, I want this one particular school and I want to apply early decision, you should know that you have to sign off, as does your student, that if you are offered admissions, that you are going to attend. Now, some of the schools will ultimately give you an out if the financial aid package doesn't meet your need, but it is highly frowned upon, highly, difficult to get out of, and the high schools really frown upon that as well. So you're going to want to have an idea of whether you're going to be eligible for financial aid from that school ahead of time. Okay, so I throw this up here. I don't know if you can, because I hope you're seeing my cursor. This is the FAFSA student aid report. When you are finished completing the FAFSA with your children, and by the way, the FAFSA, they have to log in as the student and actually submit it as if the student has input all of this information. Please do not allow your students to do this on their own. This is, a form that is going to require you to put in all of your assets. It's very easy to make mistakes. We're going to go over some of the common mistakes so that you don't lose the opportunity to get as much as you can. You don't want to make those mistakes, but just note that you're going to have to, your student's going to create an FSAID, which is like basically their username and password. You're going to help them fill out the FAFSA form, and then it's going to kick this out at the end. You can print this up, or you can always go online with them to see it. But you see right here, it says EFC, and it has the little colon. Most people don't, they pass right over that, and they have no idea what their expected family contribution is. This looks like a serial number, 030804, but that really is this family's expected family contribution for that year of $30,804. Okay, so now what I'd like to go over with you guys is, how do you figure out which schools give the most amount of money? Now, I had a client this year who came in and their son wanted to attend High Point University. And they thought, well, it's a private school, and I know we're going to get a lot of money from the private school because we are eligible for financial aid, and we help them to figure out their expected family contribution. The problem with that is that that school in particular didn't give and meet 100% of demonstrated need. In fact, I think from memory, it was like they claimed to only meet 57% of demonstrated need. And then of the amount that they met, a lot of that was loans as opposed to the free money, which is scholarships and grants, which is what we always want our clients to be able to get. So the way to look, and obviously you can attend the information sessions. You can always call the financial aid office and really ask them how much money they're giving. But really their job is to get as many applications in. They're going to say, oh, we give a lot of financial aid, just apply. But you want to know two things in particular. You're going to go back to the College Board site. There are other sites that do this, but again, I love this one. Go to that paying tab, and then you're going to put in, at the top, you're going to see financial aid. You're going to click on that, and then see here at the top of this happens to be a private school. And this says 100% of need met. That's fantastic. You want the schools that you're applying to be the kind of schools that are going to meet as close to 100% as possible of your demonstrated need. Now, you won't see that with every school. Some of them might be 40%, some might be 35, some might be 70. You have to look at each one to know how generous they are if you have a demonstrated need, how much they're going to meet. Now, once you determine what percent of need they claim to meet, you're going to then come over to this. This is supposed to be a pie chart, supposed to be round. Somehow it always looks oval. But this is going to show you how much of what they give based on need is going to be in scholarships and grants versus loans and college work study. Obviously, we all want the free money, right? We want the money that's not going to have to get repaid. Scholarships and grants. So in this case, this school claims to meet 100% of demonstrated need, and 82% is going to be about, on average, scholarships and grants. That's fantastic. Now, just want to touch on college work study really quickly, because I always put down that my kids will take the college work study. It's great. I am a big advocate of it. The schools, if you're offered college work study, it does give the students an opportunity to work on campus. A lot of times they have to apply in and learn how to have a resume, but it gives them an opportunity to work, whether it's 4 hours a week or up to 8 hours a week, even 10, on campus. And a lot of times the schools will give anywhere between $1,500 and $2,500. So I just want you to know that. So this website also will show you what's the average financial aid package, how much is the average need-based loan that students are taking, how much is non-need-based, right? Is this school being generous on the merit aid side as well? Now, I just want to say one thing. A lot of people come in, I meet with a lot of people, and they'll say, my child is really bright, at the top of their class. They are going to get a lot of merit aid, I know. And we talk about the kind of schools that those students are going to be looking at. And sometimes they'll say to me, we're really only applying to Ivy League schools because our student excels that much. You have to understand and know this information ahead of time. A lot of the Ivy League schools don't give money based on merit. Okay, so you should know that ahead of time. You have to, because if your children are applying to a school that has kids that are all basically at the top of their class, and how are they going to decide who's going to get the merit aid? A lot of those schools are only giving aid based on financial need. Then there are some schools that will give a certain amount of financial aid in terms of financial need, but will then segregate a lot of funds for merit. So you just really want to understand that. Okay, so what are the key components of the college funding process? And what are some of the things that we look at when we're doing a college funding process and that you need to consider? First, again, I cannot talk about this enough, determining a real budget. We always go through this. It's, people hate us when we ask them to do it. But it's really important to look at all of the expenses, and we have a process for that. Sit down. Again, you might have a lot of arguments with your spouse, who knows, but you really do need to know. And then ahead of time, look to see if you're eligible for financial aid. We can certainly, when you come in, if you do, and again, you don't have to come in person, we can always meet virtually, but we always sit down and look first at what an expected family contribution estimate is. There are ways to do it on your own as well. You can go to oh my God, I'm having a moment. FAFSA for, oh my God, it'll come back to me in a minute. But basically, when you go to studentaid.gov, there's going to be a calculator there. It allows you to input some of your information, some estimate of assets for your student and for you, as well as income. And then you can also, each of the schools on their websites are required to do a net price calculator. So you can also get a feel for what the total cost of school is going to be, as well as how much you think that they're going to be able to give you. I do want to say one thing before, well, we'll talk about it in a minute, I'm sorry. All right, so then how and where you save makes a huge difference. We're going to talk about this in a moment, but here's an example. if you're going to say, well, actually, hold on. I'm going to wait until the next slide. It'll make a lot more sense there. But when we're developing a student, a financial aid plan for somebody, it's got to do a number of things. You want to create a plan where you're saving, where you can maximize that financial aid or your merit aid. Also want to be able to access funds without penalty. Where you take funds is going to be very important for you, not only during the school years, but how it impacts you later in your life when you have other expenses. Or you don't want to blow it all on the first child to leave nothing for the remaining children. So we also want to help protect against market risk. So just as they always say, as you're approaching your years of retirement, it's important to make sure that you are protecting against market risk. It's the same thing with college planning. So, unfortunately, we have seen this before. 2008 was, it was a terrible situation where the market crashed. We basically saw a 20 to 30% drop in the market, and a lot of people had investments that they were counting on for college. Now, if the market drops 20%, you don't have enough time to replenish those funds during those college years. So it's very important to make sure that you are placing some of your college savings in an area that is not going to be exposed to that risk. And as always, and I cannot stress this enough, we're at one of the lowest tax rates in history. Whether you are saving for college or you are saving for retirement or both, you are going to want to have your assets diversified. And if a large portion of your assets are not in something that is going to be tax-free, not just tax-deferred, you're making a mistake, because at some point, and again, I don't have a crystal ball, none of us do, but at some point, taxes will increase. There's a tremendous amount of debt in our country in the trillions. We now have stimulus packages that are adding to that. At some point, they can't keep kicking the can down the road. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat, doesn't matter. At some point, taxes will likely go up. So to the extent that where you are saving for college, you can have access to those funds tax-free, it's always a better opportunity. And then overall, how do we minimize the amount of college debt, whether that's student loans or borrowing from other sources like your 401ks, your home? There's a lot of places. So, okay, let's move on. All right, so I'm not even going to go through this. This is something that we often work with when people come in to figure out how much money needs to be saved now upfront, or a combination of monthly to get to where you might need to be. And if there's a shortfall, then what do we do? Okay, so the formula for FAFSA, this is important. Parent income is a scale based on how much you earn, but the minimum is 22% of your adjusted gross income. So that's why you want to make sure you do your tax returns to the extent that you are able to have some write-offs, or you can influence how much money is taken in a particular year. That's going to influence it. So you make $100,000, $22,000 would be your starting point. Student income. Now, not that many students are earning over $6,000, but if they are, student income is considered at 50%. The students get really penalized in here, both on income and assets. Parent assets, again, there's an allowance that each of the schools will give, depending on how old you are. As you get older, they give more of an allowance before they start taking assets into consideration. But most often, it starts off for people, average age, they're going to be about $15,000. After that, the parent assets are taken into the formula at 5.64%. Student assets are a huge penalty at 20%. Now, I'm telling you this for a reason. I'm going to give you a very, very quick example. If you had $30,000 saved in your kids' names, and a lot of times accountants, and for a lot of reasons, people say, save in your kids' names, it might save you on taxes. But when it's college comes around, it hurts you. So if you had $30,000 in your a savings account or an investment account for your children, that is going to come at a 20% penalty, okay? 20% of that asset. So if you had $30,000, $6,000 a year is going to be part of that expected family contribution. That's $24,000. Now, if you were able to move that asset into a parent name ahead of time, and then even further, then it would be only at 5.64%. But for many of our clients, we're able to take a look at student assets and figure out, should we make it a parent asset? Or even better, is there a way to get it off of both the student and the parents' assets that have to be reported? And we're going to talk about that shortly. Okay, so for FAFSA, what is considered an asset? Included in the FAFSA are any of your market investments. I'm not talking about qualified funds that are retirement funds. I'm talking about straight up market investments, whether you have straight equity, mutual funds, just the stocks, the bonds, the mutual funds, checking and savings account, CDs, even your 529s. Now, many years ago, 529s were considered a student's assets. Fortunately, they have made it considered a parent asset, even though it's for the benefit of your children. So that also has to be included. So I love that some people are encouraged to put money into a 529, but then they're penalized for having the 529 and then have less of more of an expected family contribution. Other real estate. So in the FAFSA, you do not have to report the equity in your primary residence. But if you have other real estate, either rental properties or a vacation home, or you have a part ownership in, your parents' home, that is all going to have, that equity is going to have to be included in the FAFSA. And then UTMA and UGMA accounts, these are custodial accounts that are in your name for the benefit of your children. Those have to be included as well. Now, what's excluded? Your qualified funds, your IRAs, your 401ks, your pension, annuities, the life insurance, the cash value that is built up inside a life insurance policy is not included. The home equity of your primary residence, and a family-owned business. So if you have a business and you own 50% or more of that business, and you have less than 100 employees, then you don't have to declare the assets of that business. But if you have investments in other businesses or it's less than 50% or more than 100 employees, or you have partnerships, that is going to be important to make sure you know that ahead of time. Now, and then personal property does not have to be included. And I see this is a big mistake. Sometimes people will say, well, I had to put all my assets down. So I put the value of our cars and our jewelry, and I have some artwork, and those do not have to be included. Your furniture, collection items. So please be sure when you are doing the FAFSA that you are not including those. It's a big mistake. Now, very quickly, and we're not going to talk specifically in detail about the profile form, but the profile form will ask about the equity in your home, and they will ask about your qualified funds. They will not ask about life insurance values. They will not ask about the personal property, but they will ask you about your businesses. They will also require you to put tax returns in for any of those investments in any of those partnerships or businesses. Okay, so really quickly, we'll go through this because I want to make sure we get to the merit aid part, but there's a lot of very big mistakes when it comes to college planning. So one, again, seeking advice from people who aren't qualified to give it. Please don't do that. Don't assume you won't qualify. Again, a lot of money is left on the table. There is no harm in applying. A lot of people will say, well, it'll hurt your chances to get into school. It really won't, because if you need the money and want the money, then you have to apply. And most of the schools know that there are going to be people that are willing to pay for those seats, but there are going to be some that they have to help. And applying for financial aid often makes it easier to get merit aid, believe it or not. Biggest mistake is, again, burying the head in the sand, not having a defined saving strategy or adjusting it based on new knowledge or new opportunities, and putting a strategy in place. So the fact that you're here is a great sign that you're going to do that. Accumulating assets in your child's name is not great when it comes to college planning. Do not list a 529 as a student asset. You may not catch it as an error, and then you're going to be like, why didn't they give me so much money? I needed it, and I don't understand why they didn't give it to me. Saving in accounts that are included in the FAFSA formula. That's one of the primary things that we do when we're working with our clients, is making sure, to the extent possible, when it makes sense, to make sure that savings plans are not being penalized in that formula. Don't miss the deadlines. Again, make sure you hit those academic, admissions deadlines, but please also make sure that you don't miss the financial aid deadlines. And then be sure to follow back up with the schools on the portals that your children are going to create for each of the schools that they're applying to, because often after you submit the financial aid forms, they're going to request some additional information from you at times in different forms, and you have to make sure that you keep checking back. Make sure you're doing that with your children to make sure that they're seeing when something has to be submitted. Borrowing more than you can afford, just know that you're going to be co-signing on some of those loans. So make sure that it's something that you're going to be able to do, whether you're able to pay it back right away or down the road through other means. Never allow other relatives to make payments directly to college. There are ways that grandparents and aunts and uncles, there are better ways for them to do certain things. So a lot of times people ask about 529s. The grandparents want to have a 529 for kids. That's obviously not going to get reported on the financial aid forms, but the income will. So they'll know that there is somebody outside the home who has 529 for those kids. So just know that it's going to show up in some way. So there's some better ways to do that. We can always talk about that later. And oh my gosh, this is the worst. If my child gets into their dream school, we're just going to make it work. Now, I know we all have the best for our children. We want them to have everything that they could ever dream of, but just getting into a school that they've been talking about for a long time and dreaming about that isn't enough to be willing to put yourself in substantial debt to jeopardize the rest of what you have for your life, okay? So just be careful with that. Okay, so quickly, so we talked about need-based financial aid. We've talked about some proper planning and what goes into a real plan. But what about merit? What does this mean? How do you figure out if your children are eligible for merit-based aid? Again, for those that hopped on late and might have missed this, just because your child is not in the top 10% of their class or even the top 25% of the class, depending on where your child fits, if you choose the right school, they could be eligible for merit aid. And there's this whole idea of like the middle 50, understanding what the average applicants for that school are and the average students that are admitted, and understanding that so you know where your student stands. Now, many of your schools, I think almost every high school uses something like, my school uses Naviance. There are other computer programs and software that is available at your school. So you can figure out, where does your student fit relative to other students at the school in the past who have applied to certain schools. Did they get in? Did they not get in? Did they accept the offers? They will show what the average, they'll have a chart, and it's going to be GPA and standardized testing scores, and then where everybody applied, if they got in, if they didn't get in, and it will show where your student stands. Now, that will give you a very good idea of whether your child is going to be one that a school is going to seek and want to fill a seat. And if they really want them, and your student has performed better than some of the students at your own school, you're going to start having a good idea whether they're going to be eligible for merit aid. So make sure, if you haven't yet gotten access to it, a lot of schools don't give access to the students or the parents until about junior year, but take a look at that. Again, it's only going to tell you how your student fits in with the rest of the students at the school, but that's a good starting point. Every school on their website is going to publish some of their average criteria. This happens to be a private school. They get about 16,000 applications a year. They're only accepting students for their freshman class of 1,670. And here's the thing, look at this. It says the percent of admitted freshman applicants who ranked in the top 10% of their high school class was 72. So you know right off the bat, 72% of the students that were admitted ranked in the top 10% of their school. So if your student didn't rank in the top 10% of the school, they might not be eligible for that type of merit aid. Now, it doesn't mean they won't be eligible for financial aid based on need, but merit aid, not so likely. This school goes on to say, well, even more so, 93% of the admitted freshmen ranked in the top 20%. So again, you know right off the bat, if your student's not in that top 10 or top 20%, really top 10, they're not going to get anything at that school. But all schools will tell you where their mid SAT and ACT range is, as well as their average GPA. GPA is, it's hard, it's a little confusing. Different schools have different levels. Some go as high as 5.5, some only go to 4.0, but they do it on, they look at it in a number of different ways. Regardless, they make it all equal. So at the end of the day, if you're looking at school, and in this case, this school was looking at their weighted scale, their average was 3.86 to 4.31 on a 4.0 scale. So out of 4.0. Okay, it doesn't matter. You want to make sure that your student understands what that mid 50% range is, because both with standardized testing and GPA, if you're expecting merit aid, you are going to want to be above the average. Okay, so if the average SAT score is 1,300 to 1,430 and your student has a 1,500, well, that's terrific. They might be eligible for merit aid at this school. Okay, now here's the thing. We talked earlier about this idea of terms called safety schools, target schools, and reach schools. Some guidance counselors will say, don't get hyped up on that. There is no such thing as a safety. Sometimes you don't know what to expect, but you can figure out what the average academic criteria is at each of these schools. And if your kids have many schools that are reach schools on their list, that is meaning that your student is in the bottom 25% of that applicant pool, and they're likely never going to get merit aid there. If they have target schools, this is like a perfect academics fit for them based on their SAT and ACT and their leadership skills and their talents, but it's their target school, that means they're falling within the mid 50% range. Again, if they're able to get any merit aid, it's going to be small. Where you have the best opportunity is the safety schools, and that means that your students are falling into the 25% or higher of the applicant pool in terms of their academic performance. That's your best chance of getting merit aid. So are these reach schools really worth it? I hear, a lot of times parents will say, I just want my kids to just try to get into the best school that they possibly can get into. And sometimes kids can rise to the occasion, but when schools are reach schools, you got to understand they're not going to get as much aid. Secondly, because they're lucky to get into that school, but now they're amongst a lot of students for whom that school is a target school or a safety school. It could be too competitive. And in that case, will they meet the grades? Will they drop out? Is it going to be too difficult for them? Are they going to have to transfer? And because you're not getting as much aid, is it too expensive? And are you going to have to take on more debt for it? And is it really worth it? And I've read this book. I love it. It's called Blink. It's an older book, but Malcolm Gladwell did a study where he looked at a whole bunch of students and to see, does a student who falls into a situation where they're an average student in a more elite school, how do they perform later in life versus a student that's in an average school but's really at the top of the class? And at the end of the day, in this study, what they found was it's really about the student and not the school. So if they're able to shine and they're able to do a lot at that school, they tended to perform better later. So I would just say caution you on having too many of those reach schools. You can always think, throw one or two in the mix and make some decisions, but understand that it might cost you more money and it might be a little more difficult for the kids. Okay, so regardless of what you get on your financial aid package, and again, you're not going to miss those deadlines, you're going to get your financial aid package, you're going to always appeal. I know that sounds crazy and it's a little nerve-wracking for people, but I always call and reach in. Okay, so I'm just, by the way, I know if some people have to hop off, if you want to meet and you want to set up some time, please let me know. You can pop it into the chat room. We'll talk about it more at the end, but if you have to hop off for any reason, just let us know. You can even send me a private message, and I'm happy to sit down and see how this applies to you. But you're always going to appeal. I appeal my financial aid package every year. Now, you're not going to want to just call up and have nothing to say. You're going to be polite. You're going to be respectful of the financial aid rep. You're not going to yell at them because you didn't get as much money. You're going to try to find out if they have a formal process. Some schools have a very formal process where if you don't meet certain criteria like unemployment or a death in the family, or you're caring for an elderly parent all of a sudden, or there's some other kind of illness and some medical expenses, they don't even let you appeal. But that's okay, you're going to know that. But for some schools, it's as much as calling up and trying to explain why you are in need of more money and asking them to go back and sharpen the pencil to get you a little closer so that you can make it happen for your children. You're always going to want them to think that this is your child's number one choice. In fact, when we're working with our clients and they are nearing that time period, hopefully we're working with them a lot earlier, but as they approach it, we always recommend that you look at some schools that are similar to some of the schools your kids want to go to that might give a more advantageous financial aid package, and have them apply to there also, even if you have no real desire to go to that school, because there is an opportunity to sometimes, as you're going in for freshman year, to use that financial aid award letter from another school and bring it to the school that you're hoping will give you more money, and explaining to them that school is your child's first choice, but you are getting some financial aid packages that are larger, and you are hoping that they would consider, maybe meeting that type of aid package. It's done frequently. Know your EFC ahead of time and where they stand compared to other students, both in the full applicant pool, but also within your own high schools. And don't take it personally, but look, my mother always told me there's no harm in ever asking anybody for anything. All they can say is no. If you call and you ask for something, and they say we really can't, that's okay. You're not going to risk what they've already offered you, so don't worry. And again, they count on me calling every single year. And again, some schools will do it. My daughter goes to a school that is very generous, and every time I call and I make appeal, and if it makes sense, they try to get her some more aid. My son's school, I tremble when I'm calling, but I still call. Okay, key takeaways. Again, burying your head is not a solution. I am really begging you, regardless of what you do when you get off of this call, take this information and sit down and make some plans and reach out to people that can help you, and be aware, because again, what you do early on is going to make a difference. And if you feel like it's already too late and you're already at that point, you have 3 and 4 more years to go, maybe even more if your kids don't graduate on time, to make some changes. And you certainly, if you have multiple children, can plan accordingly for them. Key, where you save and how you save is very critical. Don't discount that. And choosing a college with the right fit. Again, social fit, academic fit, as well as financial fit for your family. So I have gone a long time. We're actually over our time frame, but if anybody can if you can, I think my partner Carl might be on the phone, if he could take some pictures of those that are asking for information or to meet. Again, pop your numbers up there, or you can also feel free to reach out to me. The only thing I ask, because we don't charge to do this, is that if you make an appointment with us, that you come, that you really just are respectful of our time as well, and we can talk about the kind of information that you should bring to our meeting, whether it's virtual or in person, and that if you do have a spouse or significant other or somebody that is involved in your financial decisions, that you bring them along so that everybody's on the same page. And I would just say that that is a really important thing to do if you are married or have an ex or a significant other and you are working through payments together. It's very important to be on the same page. A lot of families aren't, and it takes this planning process to get there because you know, different people have different goals and expectations and what they're willing to pay for and not pay for and what they want the kids to do. So, and also making sure you all understand where this money can come from. Just sit down and be open and you know, I always say, like, when people are with us in person for these, I was like, a lot of people are going to have to get off this call and go have a glass of wine or go cry. But please don't. Just know that, don't worry. There's always things that you can do and to figure out, and just take action. And I wish you all the best of luck. It's a trying time for your kids, but it's also a difficult time for parents as well. I recognize that. Again, I am right there with you, and I'm going to be going through the process as well. But if you have younger children, if you have students that are in elementary school, middle school, or early high school ages, start now. Do not wait. If you're in the junior, senior level, don't panic. There are things that can be done. But for the families that have younger children right now, please don't wait. You have more options and more timing when you act earlier. So anyway, I thank you. Louisa, thank you for setting this up for us. I'm so happy to be a part of it. And
thank you so much, Jody. This was a fabulous presentation.
Awesome. And again, you know, feel free to ask any questions, guys, and keep lists and notes of things if we are going to meet so we can go over. But really, I'm just wishing you all well and safety, and thank you so much. And I hope to see and talk to you guys very soon.
All righty.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.